giving way. Just on airdrops, does he agree that for the threat of the 1st of June deadline to be credible, World Food Programme planes either need to be protected by member states or we will need to do the airdrops ourselves? Has operational planning begun from DFID and the Ministry of Defence to enable those drops to proceed?
Well, these drops, the plan is that these drops will be made by the World Food Programme using contracted civilian aircraft. Now, the World Food Programme is already making food airdrops into Dar ez-Zor, the isolated city in the east of Syria.
OK, I'm going to speak formally, but I do want to just start by saying thank you. This is unbelievable, unbelievable, and we all appreciate this massively, as does Brendan, who isn't here today. He's looking after the children. Yeah, it's amazing. Proper Yorkshire people. Absolutely beautiful. So, it's not going to be easy. There are some things in life you should never have to do. Last night I had to go and identify my sister's body. Yes, this was Jo Cox MP, and she was many things to many people in her too short life. But she was my sister, my only sibling, my parents' firstborn child, a wife and a mum. This is a very surreal situation. My parents and my partner and I are quite private people, and Jo, in true character, had fully respected our wish to remain out of the public eye. But I could not continue to watch the overwhelming outpouring of genuine grief, sympathy and love that there has been since this horrendous incident occurred, without speaking on behalf of Jo's family. We want to say a most sincere and heartfelt thank you to everyone who has expressed their love and affection for Jo and sent their thoughts and sympathy to us. It has genuinely made a difference and helped us through some dark times in the last 48 hours. We would particularly like to thank the police and emergency services, who have been outstanding in the care they have provided to Jo and ourselves. Absolutely outstanding. We'd also like to thank the brave and courageous gentleman, Bernard Kenny, who tried to help her in her hour of need. Our thoughts and thanks go to him and his family, and we wish him well in his recovery. What an amazing man, yeah. Jo's team of staff, both here and in London, have been a source of support and strength to her since she was elected, and she loved them dearly. I would particularly like to pay tribute to Sandra and Fazila, who were with her on Thursday. Two of the most wonderful women you could hope to meet. From a very young age, all Jo ever wanted was for everyone to be happy. We were brought up to see the positive in everything and everyone, and have endeavoured to do so all our lives. Our parents instilled in us a real glass half full mentality. And whilst I sometimes tend to add a large measure of Yorkshire cynicism to this, Jo generally did not. She only saw the good. We know that there are some evil people in this world, but there are an awful lot of good people too. When Jo would get abuse on Facebook or Twitter, we would talk and sometimes cry together. But she would still focus on the positive and talk about the silent majority who didn't always shout the loudest, but who she knew were in her corner. I am somewhat embarrassed to say that I was at times part of that silent majority. I don't do social media and would shout at the TV or get upset at home instead. But over the past 48 hours, people have not been silent. They have been vocal and passionate and have spoken from the heart with genuine emotion and no hidden agendas. Jo would have loved it. We have to continue this strength and solidarity in the days, months and years to come, as part of Joe's legacy. And to focus on, as Joe would say, that which unites us and not which divides us. For now, our family is broken, but we will mend over time, and we will never let Jo leave our lives. She will live on through all the good people in the world, through Brendan, through us, and through her truly wonderful children, who will always know what an utterly amazing woman their mother was. She was a human being, and she was perfect. Thank you.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Members, at the start of business today, I want to inform the House that I wrote to the Speaker of the House of Commons last week to express our sorrow at the tragic murder of Jo Cox MP. I have asked him to pass the condolences of this Assembly to her parliamentary colleagues, but particularly to her family, who have experienced a heartbreaking loss. In this place, we have too much history of elected representatives from all sides of the chamber being subject to threat or attack, but it makes it no easier to understand Jo Cox's murder. At a time of deep cynicism with politics across the Western world, Jo Cox will now shine out as a model of the role we value as elected representatives, to be devoted to working with our constituents as we seek to improve our society on their behalf. It should be of immense pride to Jo Cox's family that the tributes to her have clearly demonstrated that she was held in high esteem across the political spectrum. At a time when bitter and negative political debate is often more likely to dominate the airwaves, the tributes to her are a reminder of the fact that respect, good working relationships and friendships do exist in politics, regardless of being different parties holding different political views. Perhaps we all need to reflect on why it takes such a tragedy to remind our society of it. As Speaker of this Assembly, I want to underline it is for all of us to defend the democratic right and the importance of elected representatives everywhere to engage with their constituents on the ground, despite the personal risks and challenges it may present. However, for today, let us recognise that a family has lost a daughter, a sister, a wife and a mother. And I know I speak on behalf of the whole Chamber when I say our thoughts and prayers are with the family and the friends of Jo Cox MP as they grieve. Let us now move to the matter of the day. Mr. David Ford has been given leave to make a statement on the death of Jo Cox MP, which fulfils the criteria set out in Standing Order 24. If other members wish to be called, they should do so by rising in their places and continuing to do so. All members will have 3 minutes to speak on the subject. I would remind members that I will not take any points of order on this or any other matter until the item of business has been completed. Call Mr. Ford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Last Thursday, I believe we were all shattered to hear the news. First of all, in the early afternoon, that a Member of Parliament had been attacked, and then in that rather sombre statement from the police that the MP had died. And I believe it's right this morning that as MPs prepare for an almost unprecedented sitting at Westminster, that we also, in this democratically elected chamber, should take time to pay our tribute to Jo Cox, MP for Batley and Spen. And I thank you for the remarks that you've already made about the letter that you have written to the Speaker of the House of Commons on behalf of all of us. I'm sure that's an action which will be endorsed by everybody here today. Of course, Jo Cox was much more than an MP. As you've just said, she was a much-loved daughter, sister, wife, mother and friend, and her death has clearly touched a very wide circle in her constituency and far beyond. The circumstances of the death are well known and do not need to be rehearsed in detail. A Member of Parliament shot and stabbed outside a library where she regularly held a constituency surgery meeting the needs of her constituents, the norm for public representatives in every part of the UK. But what, of course, has emerged since that tragedy is that Jo Cox was a very exceptional person. Although she'd only entered Parliament last year, she'd already established a very strong reputation, made a very considerable impression on fellow MPs for her courage, her compassion and her commitment. And that came following a route to Westminster which was not the easy route that some would have of working for the party and then inheriting a safe seat. She had a substantial career in which she worked on behalf of some of the world's poorest people in her capacity for Oxfam. In that work, she campaigned on Syria. She worked with people in Sudan. She had a very significant effect on public opinion and on the formation of public policy. I believe she then also showed all that is best in politics by her wish and her desire to serve her own neighbours, the people of the constituency in which she lived, where she had her roots and had been brought up. That perhaps made her more approachable than some MPs. It also maybe tragically made her more vulnerable. Too many public representatives are subjected to a tide of vilification for the work they do. It seems to be a particular issue which affects women in public life, subject to torrents of abuse from men who feel that they have some sort of right to spew out hatred. But what we need to recognise is what has happened in this context. And let us remember, finally, the words of her husband when he paid tribute and said she would have wanted two things above all else to happen now. One, that our precious children are bathed in love, and two, that we all unite to fight against the hatred that killed her. That, Mr. Speaker, would be a real living tribute to her.
The First Minister, Mrs. Arlene Foster.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And this is a very sad day for politics in the United Kingdom. And can I join with others in thanking you for the action that you've already taken in conveying to the Speaker of the House of Commons our deepest sympathy to her colleagues there. And the murder of Jo Cox was shocking and was undoubtedly a tragic event that will live long in the memory. Thankfully, the murder of a Member of Parliament is a rare event, but we feel the loss all the more because of that. Outside those murders carried out by Irish Republicans in connection with the Troubles in Northern Ireland, this was the first murder of a Member of Parliament since 1812. And perhaps nowhere more than in Northern Ireland, we on all sides of this House understand the pain of the loss of a colleague, whether as members of the Westminster Parliament, members of the old Stormont Parliament, or those more broadly involved in politics here. And though the threat to those involved in politics here is not what it once was, we all must still remain vigilant. However, we must not ever close our doors to those who elect us or become detached from those who send us here. And last Thursday was a dark day for politics because it was an attack on the whole democratic process. But of course it was above all a tragedy for Jo Cox's family and her close friends. We especially remember her husband Brenton and her two young children at this time. I didn't know Jo Cox personally, but it's clear from the many tributes and indeed talking to some of my Westminster parliamentary colleagues, she was a remarkable individual and was going to have a very strong, exceptional, maybe even so, career ahead of her. Our prayers and sympathy go out to all of those people who knew Jo Cox personally in the difficult days that lie ahead. But Jo's murder serves as a timely reminder to all of us involved in politics that despite the difference we may have on one issue or another of the values that are shared right across the political spectrum, and we must never lose that thing that unites us, and that was something very clear that came from her husband. We owe it to her and to ourselves that we conduct ourselves in a manner consistent with the best traditions of democracy. And that doesn't mean that we don't argue or differ, but it does mean that we do so in a more respectful tone than is sometimes the case. And when I took over as First Minister, Mr. Speaker, I made a call that we do politics differently, and I think that we have made progress, but let this event help us to redouble our efforts here in Northern Ireland. On this day also, let us remember the words of President Kennedy, that civility is not a sign of weakness, and that this dreadful event can bring a new civility to politics, not just for a few days, but can be seen to make a new start to how politics is done. Thank you.
Deputy First Minister, Mr. Martin McGuinness.
Mr. Speaker, can I first of all thank you for giving us the opportunity to say a few words on this terrible murder that took the life of Joe Cox. And I want to thank you also for writing on behalf of all of us to the Speaker, expressing our deepest sympathy and condolences to her colleagues at Westminster. Obviously, in the first instance, whenever a terrible event like this happens, we think of the family. We think of her husband, Brendan. We think of her 2 children. We think of her parents, her sister, and wider family circle. And I'm sure the deepest sympathy and condolences of all of the members of this House go out to them at this tragic time. Also, sympathy to the Labour Party, to her party leader, Jeremy Corbyn, and to all those within the Labour Party who had a huge respect for Jo. She obviously was an exceptional person, and to be killed in the way that she was killed was a total contradiction to the goodness and energy that she displayed in her work for some of the most underprivileged people, not just in her own constituency, but throughout the world, because she was an internationalist, she was a feminist, she worked at the coalface with Oxfam, with many people who had suffered as a result of conflict. And for her to be killed in this way was absolutely terrible. I want to thank you also for referring to the fact that in our own circumstances over many years, elected representatives on all sides of this House, from parties on all sides of this House, also lost their lives. And indeed in my own party, more so than any other party in this Assembly. But I think all of this has to serve to inspire all of us to ensure, particularly given what we have come through during the course of the conflict here, that we continue to work together with a positive and constructive spirit and in a spirit of generosity with each other to ensure that we continue to move forward and be an example, as I think we have been to many other conflict situations throughout the world in relation to the resolution of conflict. So this is a very tragic event, but I think it is quite clear that the outpouring of grief and respect and sympathy for Jo Cox and for her family clearly shows that love will win out over hate in the end.
Mr. Mike Nesbitt.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I did not know Jo Cox. I would not pretend to have known much, indeed, about her work, either as a Member of Parliament or previously in her work with NGOs and on causes. But it is impossible not to be deeply impressed by what one has read and heard about that work from the many tributes and obituaries since Thursday's terrible, terrible events. That said, this is first and foremost a personal and a family tragedy. And like the other speakers, my thoughts and prayers are with the 2 young girls and with her husband, Brendan, whose words were so swift, so assured, so inspiring. It was difficult not to think of Gordon Wilson in the aftermath of the Enniskillen bombing. But as well as a personal and a family tragedy, it was an attack on democracy, and it would be remiss not to remember those who have lost their lives as Democrats in this country. Jo Cox, the first female MP, as I understand it, to be murdered. Robert Bradford, of course, was the first Northern Irish MP to be murdered during the course of the Troubles. In November 1981, he was doing what Jo Cox was trying to do last Thursday, serving his constituents, holding a surgery in a community centre in Finnegy in Belfast, gunned down along with a council worker, I believe, a worker from that community centre, also murdered on that very black day. And of course he was not the only Ulster Unionist to die, nor indeed does any one party have a monopoly on the death of elected politicians during the course of our troubles. So sadly we know only too well what it is like to see others attack the democratic